So welcome, and thanks for coming. We weren't sure with the gun thing going on downstairs what was going to happen. You have to go through all sorts of security to get in here. We were afraid you were going to have to show your passport and more. Yeah. So anyway, I'm really pleased to have our speaker today, Dr. Fiona Godlee. She's the editor-in-chief at the BMJ, and she's been in this position since 2005. But getting there, she has a long and very interesting career. I'll tell you a little bit about it. She qualified as a doctor in 1985 and then trained as a general physician at Cambridge and in London. And then she went to the BMJ in 1990, where she was as an editor. And she's written on a broad array of subjects there, so including WHO and other topics. So then, in 1994, she had a Harkness Fellowship and went to Boston at Harvard University and studied there for a year, and then went back to the BMJ where she started clinical evidence, which many of you probably know. After that, she was there for, it's now provided worldwide, I think, in 9 languages, and it's a really big deal. It incorporates the results from systematic reviews and is put out on a regular basis telling clinicians what works and what doesn't. And you can always ask her questions if you have specific questions about what it was then. But she's moved on. In 2000, she went over to Current Science Group, and she established an open access online journal and became the publisher of Biomed Central, which we publish in, and many of you probably too, a really excellent open access resource. Then she went back to the BMJ as editor-in-chief. So along the way, she served as president of WAMI, the World Association of Medical Editors, and chair of the Committee on Publication Ethics at COPE. She's editor, has been, or is co-editor of peer review in the health sciences. And she's done a lot of things related to ethics and data access and so forth. And those of you who are regular readers of the BMJ, I assuming most of you since you're here, know how much the BMJ has been involved in writing about open access to clinical trial data and what's been accomplished in Europe especially, and a question for us is what can we do here in the U.S. that's comparable with the FDA? So on a personal note, Dr. Godlee lives in Cambridge, the UK, with her husband and children. Hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Taddy. The bit that Taddy didn't mention is that when I was here in 1994, I spent Thanksgiving with Taddy's family, 4 generations of her family. It was really wonderful. And yesterday, Taddy added another generation to her family with her first grandchild, so that's really marvelous. Fantastic. There was no doubt in my mind when I said to Taddy, could I come? I was going to be here for a meeting and I wanted to come and talk to you guys. This is an important institution doing a lot of important work. And I said to Taddy, could she set up a seminar, which she kindly has done. And there was no doubt in my mind what I would talk about. And it's about trial data. And I recognize it's a topic that for many of you will be something you live and breathe. I mean, I don't know what you will do, but I guess you're here because you have an interest in this. And so I doubt there'll be very much I'll tell you which will be surprising to you. And at times I even think I begin to bore myself about this topic. But as we were discussing just before the meeting began, there's a sense of handing on the baton. And Taddy and others have certainly inspired me with this topic. And I feel that my job is to kind of hand on the baton because the fight is ongoing and is by no means over. I was reminded that I'd actually been here in this very room, I think, in 2006, April the 4th, talking about defending the integrity of the biomedical literature. So that was just after I'd become editor, and I was just pulling together at that stage all the various things that trouble editors, which are around research misconduct, hiding of data, manipulation of data, a whole host of things, conflict of interest undeclared, bias, all of which are so now familiar to us and almost to the extent that we begin to accept them as normal. And I was really in that talk just trying to pull together the threads of those issues. And I looked back over the talk, and I sadly feel I could give almost that talk again. So there is a sort of sense of weariness, but I think that what's great about this moment is that we do feel, it feels to me like we are beginning to be on the cusp of a change. And many of you in this room are contributing to that. And I think it's a really important change that we might see. In this talk I gave in 2006, I told some stories, or at least tried to present some of the little episodes in the saga. And there's only one I'll just repeat now, because it's a bit iconic and you will remember it. And it's the story of Vioxx, which played out during the early 2000s. And the story of Vioxx is a drug that was developed to try to reduce gastrointestinal side effects of people who were taking painkillers. And these COX-2 inhibitors were considered to be a new type of drug that would really revolutionize pain relief in people with arthritis, and indeed were revolutionizing lives around the world, because they were fantastically good at pain relief and they didn't seem to have quite such bad side effects on the gut. And sure enough, a study in the New England Journal in 2000 showed that nice effect of a reduced incidence of GI adverse events in people taking Refacoxib. And what this study doesn't show, however, is that there was a month of data missing. So while they've reported a month's worth, while they've reported the GI side effects for a certain amount of time, they've reported the cardiovascular side effects for 1 month less. And during that 1 month, there were 3 additional myocardial infarctions in the group of patients taking the active drug, the new drug. And this has become a kind of iconic result, published in the world's best journal. And as you may know, over a period of time, other studies were published, this one in JAMA the year later, showing an increased rate of myocardial infarction in people taking these drugs. And sure enough, in New England Journal itself in 2004, a study which showed the same effect of a higher rate of thrombotic side effects. What we now know is that that increased thrombotic effect was known right from the start. It was known in the early days when the first trials of these drugs were being done, when the drug was being licensed, that the steering committee saw it and they managed to explain it away. They managed to convince the researchers at the time to change their findings slightly to downplay this effect. And we also know that there were conflicts of interest in the people involved in the steering committee on the trials. We know that there were ghost authors of the trials. So there's a whole heap of stuff which comes together to reflect the culture which we've all been existing in, and that culture has influenced the drugs that patients are taking to this day. This drug itself was taken off the market just after publication of this study. I view that, and many people more experienced, more specialist in this area than me, view that as a great tragedy, because the drug was a good drug. It helped a lot of people. If those patients had been told you could be pain-free but have a slightly increased risk of myocardial infarction, they might well have said, that's what I choose to do. But they haven't now been given that choice because the information was withheld. And Merck, who produced the drug, decided their reputation wasn't worth the fight, and they pulled out. So that was one story I told in 2006. It's an old story, but the question is this history? When we repeat these calls for more openness, the pharmaceutical industry, the regulators, others tend to say, oh, well, those are old patterns of behaviour, things have moved on. And sure enough, things have moved on a little bit, but not nearly as far as we would like. And here's a study from the New England Journal published in 2008, which looks at selective publication of antidepressant trials and the influence on their apparent efficacy. And these researchers looked at trials relating to FDA decisions across all antidepressant types and found that overwhelmingly those that agreed with FDA licensing decision to license these drugs were the positive trials had been published, that those who conflicted or were negative had largely been left unpublished. So it's just another example of something we know that happens, positive publication bias, selective publication right across the literature. And we know from a recent report by a German group published in Trials, in the journal Trials, published in 2010, that this kind of thing affects the entire medical literature. It's not limited to certain types of specialty, not limited to certain types of drugs or interventions. So we've got a system-wide problem, and it's not going away fast. Avandia, another example where hidden data, again with cardiovascular side effects for this diabetes drug, were uncovered, and the drug eventually has been withdrawn from use in Europe as a result of this. So what we had here again was a combination of conflict of interest, hidden data, ghost authorship, drug company influence on the type of study that was done, and the way in which the study was done, the way in which the data were reported, what the regulator was told. A usual can of worms. Yet another sad saga. This is new. This is now. This is not history. And then I apologise. This is going to be a bit of a BMJ fest. I just found myself flicking through our. I worry about boring our readers, actually, if anything, about this. Oh, God, here we go again. So, missing data, casting doubt on the evidence base. We published this very wonderful study from IQWiG, which is the German equivalent of the British National Institute of Clinical Excellence. And the people at IQWiG, I think, showed an enormous amount of courage in this case. And this, again, has become an iconic example of what happens if you stand up to the pharmaceutical industry. So IQWiG said, we won't license your drug unless you give us the data. And Pfizer, who produced this very widely used antidepressant reboxetine, said they wouldn't produce the data, and they kept on saying they wouldn't produce it. But eventually they did produce it because they were being told they otherwise wouldn't have their drug approved for reimbursement in Germany. And what these data show are that when you look at the various outcomes, so we've got remission, we've got response, we've got patients with adverse events, and we've got withdrawal owing to adverse events. And you look at the published, sorry, my hand's going to be a bit wobbly here. We look at the published result, which is a nice positive result, but then you put in the unpublished result, and then you join those two together. In each case, the effectiveness of the drug disappears pretty well completely. Here, on response to the drug, the thing disappears pretty completely. When it comes to adverse events, again, you get a similar result. When you get withdrawal, you get the reverse effect, that there was very little evidence of withdrawal from the published data, good evidence of withdrawal from the unpublished data, and the final result not in favour of the drug being beneficial to patients. Interestingly, this is a drug which we discovered after we published this has been used in rat models for depression. So reboxetine is the ideal animal model for a rat with depression. If you hang a rat from its tail, or put a rat in a tub of water and ask it to swim, if you give it this drug, it energizes more. It's a great thing to get you a depressed rat less depressed. But these data have so the reboxetine rat test is being used to test other antidepressants. But these data have made the animal researchers question the use of reboxetine as a model for use of antidepressants. So this whole wheel within wheels is proving very interesting. And I do think this is a very iconic piece of work. You may be too familiar with the story. I certainly am, and so I'll forget. I don't know. I'm going to tell it anyway because, again, I think it's a really extraordinary piece of work by colleagues of Taddy's and people in this room. Peter Doshi is here, who's been a fantastic, hugely energetic and expert worker on this particular problem, along with Tom Jefferson and others. So. In about 2009, I can't remember quite the dates, but the flu pandemic arose, and the UK government and other governments started stockpiling antiviral drugs. And the Cochrane collaboration was asked, the Cochrane Review Group was asked to revise its Cochrane Review on antiviral drugs, the neuroaminidase inhibitors, of which one is oseltamivir, Tamiflu. And the way Tom Jefferson, Peter's colleague, tells the story, he thought this would be a pretty routine piece of work. They would look back at what they did before, and they would look for some new studies, and then they'd write their review, and off they'd go. But what they found when they went back to look at their old review, there was this comment that had come from a Japanese doctor, just gently drawing the reviewer's attention to the fact that the studies that they had included in their review, these 10 trials, had all been pulled together by Roche, the manufacturer Roche, funded meta-analysis. And of those 10 trials, all of which were Ross funded, only 2 had actually been published in peer-reviewed journals. The other 8 had never been published and existed only as abstracts. All of these 10 trials, as I say, were either funded by Roche, done by Roche employees. So they were, and the data were all within Roche's ownership. So based on this, the Cochrane Review Group went to Roche and said, can we see your data? We need to have a look at this. Well, sorry, they went first of all to the author of the review, and they said go to Roche, and they went to the individual trialists of the 2 published trials in JAMA and in The Lancet, and both of those sets of authors said you'll have to go to Roche for the data. And so the Cochrane Review Group went to Roche to ask for the data. And then begins a long story of stalling, inaction, and complete refusal to make these data available, to the extent that the Cochrane Review Group was reaching its deadline for writing its review and had to come to the view that it couldn't any longer say that Tamiflu was effective in reducing complications of influenza. So that review was published, the update, and along with it, a series of articles which tried to unpick why it was proving so difficult to track down the data on oseltamivir, and really beginning to explore the idea that here was a drug on which countries around the world were spending vast sums of money, and which has subsequently been added to the WHO essential drug list, which includes things like paracetamol and aspirin, and Tamiflu is now on that essential drug list. How had these decisions been made without access, without anyone apart from the drug company having access to the trial data? And Peter's paper, article on this, I think is one of the things I'm proudest of publishing in the BMJ, because it does something rather fascinating. It looks at this very extraordinary discrepancy between the guidance and advice given by these various major groups around the world in relation to the effectiveness of Tamiflu on complications of influenza. And what you'll see of interest, apart from the fact that you've got the EMA on one side saying that it does work and the FDA on the other side saying that it doesn't work, is this very top line, where you've got Roche on the one hand saying it does work and on the other hand saying it doesn't work. And when you look into that, what you see is the website that says that it doesn't work is intended for US audiences only. So you've got regulators around the world coming to completely different decisions based on analysis of this very patchy and selective review of the data. I'll come back to Tamiflu. I'm afraid it's a topic that I can rarely leave for long. The BMJ had, back in the beginning of last year, then a theme issue. We invited authors to send us their work they were doing on missing trial data, and a rather good editorial by my colleague Elizabeth Loader and also Richard Lehman, who's an extraordinary GP in Oxford, recently been at Yale doing some work with Joe Ross and other people on exactly this issue. And I'll just quote you, because I think there's a lovely paragraph in it which exactly reflected my feeling at the time in relation to what the Tamiflu research had shown. There is an Alice in Wonderland feel to these investigators' efforts, acting on the public's behalf, searching over hill and dale and among the paperwork of regulatory bodies and drug companies to put together pieces of data that should have been freely available in the first place. Even when data on individual participants are made available, they only form part of the jigsaw. And Ahmed and colleagues, that's one of the quotes, describe the problem of fitting such data into the whole picture. You've got this strange group of slightly mad people, journal editors, investigative journalists, epidemiologists, data wonks, all really almost in their spare time, as far as I can see, trying to pick out what is going on. And it just feels like a form of madness. Also in this editorial, Elizabeth and Richard say, concealment of data should be regarded as the serious ethical breach that it is, and the clinical researchers who fail to disclose data should be subject to disciplinary action by professional organisations. This may achieve quicker results than legislation. And that's perhaps something that at the end of this talk we can discuss, is really where should our efforts be placed. I mean, I think it'll have to be both of those things, but we absolutely have to put the onus on the researchers to make their data available. In that theme issue, we published 4 pieces of research, and I'll just mention a couple of them in detail. Hart et al. Did this rather good thing of looking at what happened if you reanalyzed drug data from previous meta-analyses, if you added in the unpublished data that the FDA held. So they must have got these unpublished data through FOIs. And they looked at 42 meta-analyses, of which one was about harms and the others was about efficacy, on 9 drugs. And they found that actually when you reanalyzed it, it could fall both ways. So 46% of the new estimates showed lower efficacy and 46% greater efficacy, and 7% the efficacy was the same. And on the single harms meta-analysis, the harms were greater. And their conclusion was the effect of including unpublished FDA trial outcome data varies by drug and outcome. Unpublished FDA trial outcome data should be available and included in meta-analyses. But there is the problem of how to make these data easily accessible. Another paper was by Joe Ross and colleagues, and what they looked at was NIH-funded trials to see whether they had been, once they had been registered, how long it took for the results of those trials to be published. And you'll know that the FDA Amendment Act requires a very timely publication of results. So you register your trial at the first possible opportunity, before the first patient is recruited, ideally, and then you publish the results within a year of the final data collection. That's what the FDA Amendment Act now requires. But this study showed that of the 635 trials they looked at, 46%, only 46% were published in journals within 30 months. So that's this, if you look here, 30 months, and up to sort of 46%. So fewer than half of these registered trials were published within 30 months of registration. So the FDA Amendment Act is there, but it's not really working as yet. And their conclusions, despite recent improvement in timely publication, fewer than half of trials funded by NIH were published in a peer-reviewed journal within 30 months. Moreover, after a median of 51 months after trial completion, a third of trials remained unpublished. So we only, at the peak, reach just over 60% of trials published. Also in that theme issue was this very good article by Anwen Chan, which is a problem for systematic reviewers, how to find unpublished clinical trial evidence. We've all got to, it's a burden that the Cochrane collaboration takes on, others as well, and it really shouldn't be this difficult. Seems to me to be the obvious conclusion. This is a lovely paper by Beate Weisler and others. She is one of the people at ICWIG. I mentioned their fantastic work on reboxetine, where they forced Pfizer to provide the data. And this was subsequently published in the journal, where she and colleagues talk about how they did what they did and what they learned from it and what they think needs to happen now. A tale of hide and seek. I mean, it is beyond ridiculous. And these were their recommendations, that if we're going to move on from this, we need, they say, extension of the FDA Amendment Act to include drugs for which approval was declined. So these are studies these are things where the FDA has been involved, but they declined, and so the industry, those data will never come out unless the FDA Amendment Act is extended. Public access to regulatory databases containing trials of older drugs, not covered by the current law. Greater data sharing between regulatory authorities, and legal obligation for manufacturers to provide all requested data to health technology assessment bodies without commercial restrictions to publication. One sort of feels that we know all this, but it's clearly not happening, and that's part of the problem. One of the other things is, as we'll find, a lot of the conversations about what should happen to new licensing, but actually most of the drugs currently in use were licensed, in the last 10 years, rather than being licensed now. So we've got to look back. We've got to look at the legacy issues here, which is why the Tamiflu story remains of interest. Perhaps more uncomfortable for journals was this article we published from Robert Steinbrook and Jerry Kassira. Jerry Kassira used to be the editor of the New England Journal, which was really saying what medical journals should do. And I found, we did publish this, and I found it quite uncomfortable because I've longed to be more strident about this, and have tried to get the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors to take this on and to say we journals should only publish or agree to peer review articles where the trialists will share the data or be willing to share the data. And I've tried on a number of occasions to get the ICMJ to do this, feeling that one journal doing it on its own would be a foolish thing to do. Anyway, here's Robert and Jerome saying that this is really what should happen. So they came up with 3 possible approaches to this problem. One was that journals should define full access in a specific way, and that at the end, the responsible author should be ready to provide the data to the journal if requested before acceptance. So he's really saying that journals have got a role here in the same way that they did on trial registration, where to some extent it was when the journal said, we won't peer review your paper unless it has been previously registered. Now he's saying journals should do the same with data. And repeatedly over the years, it seemed to me that we were dodging this, and we had to do something. Then, by some miracle, but I'm sure as a result of all the pressure that this and other things have been putting on them, GSK came out with this announcement in October, saying that they would make available on request the data for their trials. And they said they would set up an independent group, and if you had a protocol, they would want you to have a protocol, and then that would be evaluated by this independent group as to whether the data would be released to you under certain terms. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So this was a very strangely liberating moment for me, because I suddenly thought, well, why not? Let's just do this thing. And quite soon afterwards, I think a few weeks later, we published this editorial, which you can't really see in the red, but it says the BMJ will require authors to commit to supplying anonymized patient-level data on reasonable request from 2013. So we just suddenly said, right, we're going to do this thing. I wouldn't want to make out this is such a big step, because we published relatively few drug trials. I think we published something like 20 the previous year, only 6 of which were funded by industry. So we're not at all in the same position as, say, the New England Journal of Lancet JAMA, the other big journals, where that would be this would be a major shift to their whole way of working. But we still felt, at least we're going to do this. And we got a bit of pushback saying, what do you mean by reasonable request? And what do you mean by anonymized patient data? And what do you mean by... and I just said, we don't really know yet. We're going to have to wait and see. But the other player in this whole shift was then also the European Medicines Agency, which was building up for a big announcement. And sure enough, just after this was published, the EMA announced that it would make available its trial data for drugs that are newly licensed. So from now on, from I think 2014, a drug that's licensed by the European Medicines Agency, the data will be placed in a public accessible place. Exactly the implementation details around that remain vague, and the other thing that remains vague is what will happen to the legacy drugs and whether we'll be able to get those data. On we went. This is a few months. This is now November 2012, and emboldened by various things that have changed, and inspired by Peter's endless innovative thinking around this, we've developed a website where we've decided to put all of the correspondence between the Cochrane Review Group and the various bodies involved in keeping hold of the Tamiflu data. So this is up on bmj.com now, and Peter and colleagues have made all of their email exchanges public. So it's if you've really got a couple of hours to spend, and I would say it's probably been 100 hours of Peter's time even getting it all up there, but 2 hours of your time will bear fruit. It's really very, very interesting, and it just shows the need for tenacity and a sense of humour if you're going to stay in this game. We also have got up there the correspondence not only with Roche, but with the WHO, with CDC, with the European Medicines Agency, with the European Ombudsman, and with National Institutes for Health and Clinical Excellence. This is a multiplayer saga, and I should say that GSK is going to join this little merry band of people whose correspondence with this Cochrane Review Group will be published soon, because although they have come out with this wonderful announcement that they will make their drug trial data available, and they seem to be the good guys in this exchange, because while Roche was hanging on and completely obfuscating and doing nothing around the Tamiflu data, GSK was busy saying, yes, of course, we'll cooperate and just tell us what you need around the Relenza data for the other antiviral drug. And it proves that it's not nearly so straightforward. And GSK have been saying now, actually this is a podcast, I better not say what they'll be saying, but it will be published soon on bmj.com. And I think we'll find that sadly the devil is in the detail, as with in so many of these things. We asked our readers who we thought was mainly at fault for denying access to negative clinical trial results, and this is what they said. Mainly the pharmaceutical industry, 70%. But also the legislators, the regulators, universities, that means academics, and ethics committees, the big group being regulators. And maybe that will change if the EMA shows itself to be up to its promises. But we also have been tackling the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which is the body that decides which drugs in the UK will be reimbursed by the National Health Service. And based on the Cochrane Reviewer's work, I put this letter together to the head of NICE, just calling on him to withdraw approval for Tamiflu ahead of the next flu epidemic, which is just heading our way, or already hit New York, I see, before countries start stockpiling this drug again, until it has the full data from the manufacturer. Anyway, it's elicited this response from Mike Rawlins, a good response, but actually one that brings up more questions than answers, because it made us realize for the first time that none of us really understood how NICE works, and that actually NICE is a wonderful body, and I wouldn't want anything to undermine its credibility or its existence. We need NICE. Every country needs a NICE. Germany has ICWIG. Other countries have something similar, but we certainly need NICE. But what it seems to have happened is over the years, its remit has grown so large, and the need to keep its information up to date and new drugs coming on the market, and it's slightly watered down, or quite substantially watered down, what it requires the drug industry to provide. And its reliance on drug industry controlled information is, this seems to suggest, quite substantial. So we're left with an institution which absolutely represents the right values, but is functioning at much less than an optional level of independence in terms of the data. But we have had his promise from Mike Rawlins that he will look at that again, and we're just going to keep pushing away at getting a response from him about that. I should say we also wrote an open letter to the Regius Professor of Physics at Oxford University. I mean, I don't know the equivalent at Johns Hopkins, but someone pretty substantial. I probably just met him, did I? A big cheese at Oxford University, who is on the board of Roche. And we wrote him a letter saying, can you bring your influence to bear on this situation? And how can you, as an academic and a clinician, accept this situation as it stands? We haven't really had an adequate answer, it's fair to say. Roche promised something to Cochrane which was not acceptable, and they've declined it. So that's ongoing. I always have to remind myself to ask this question, because it's all too easy to blame the pharmaceutical industry. They're an enormous player, substantial they're the big player in clinical drug trials, but they're not the only player by any means. And in order to reflect this, we published, well, let me go on actually, we published a thing just recently about sentinel node biopsy for melanoma. This is an investigation where if you've got a malignant melanoma, to find out whether it might have spread, and therefore to possibly try and prevent further spread, you inject radioactive dye into the melanoma, find the main lymph node which is draining off the melanoma, remove that, look at it, and if that's involved in any way with the malignancy, then go out and do a much more substantial clearance operation in that regional node area. So it's a big deal, and it's quite invasive, and it's very popular, and it's become the routine treatment. But the use of this treatment so widely is based on very, very limited clinical trial evidence. A study was published in the New England Journal in 2006 and found no overall survival benefit from this procedure, but a disease-free survival benefit, apparently. And the study protocol said that in 2006 they'd published the 5-year data, which they did, but it also said in subsequent years it would publish the 7-year data and the 10-year data. And we're still waiting for those data. They haven't been published. So this was a story of failure to publish by academics, and a treatment which has really taken off in the absence of any real evidence for it. And we tried to present this in terms of failure to publish, possibly causing overtreatment and harm to patients. And this editorial really just tries to make that point, that academics and non-commercial funders are just as guilty as industry in sometimes delaying publication. And this slide is from Joe Ross's work published in PLOS Medicine. And it just looks at the proportion of clinical trials registered in 1999 and published by 2007. And really you can see that failure to publish is pretty much just as common in industry and non-industry in different countries in terms of the size of the trial and in terms of the phase of the trial. There's really not a great deal of difference. This really nice, happy situation of 98% publication is certainly in the UK a bit unique. The HTA programme in the UK holds back research funds until publication. They hold back a proportion of the research funds. They chase the authors, and they also provide an open access online repository where the monograph, the whole results of the thing, can be published and then be published in research journals. So the HTA is a bit of a beacon of light, certainly in the UK. I don't know about US funders, whether they have any great success, but that's quite a bleak picture, and it does show that this is not just an industry problem. It's a system-wide problem. The latest event is this launch of a campaign, alltrials.net, all trials registered, all results reported. And the mover and shaker behind this campaign is the author of a new book called Ben Goldacre, and the book is called Bad Pharma, and it's just being released in the US pretty much now. So I do urge you to go and get a copy. Ben Goldacre is a rather exceptional person. He's a doctor, he's a journalist, he's a campaigner now, or perhaps always has been. He had a blog for a long time in the Guardian newspaper in the UK called Bad Science, where he would pick away at people making ridiculous claims about magnetism and mercury and all sorts of stuff. But this is his new passion, is the pharmaceutical industry in particular. And this is an attempt to really take this to the public and try and make it a public interest problem. I should just mention the red trial registration to give us some hope. Things are looking good. Up it goes. That little blip in 2005 was when the journal said, we won't publish your trial unless it's been previously registered. So this has been the sequence ever since. As I say, the data is a whole other issue, and that's really the new campaign. Is this fraud or not? Is suppression of data the sort of thing that the industry and perhaps academic authors are doing? Is it fraud or not? I'm just going to show you what Stephen Locke, my predecessor but one, thought in the late 80s when he was trying to place the things that journal editors worry about in these various categories of errors in good faith, timing and trimming and cooking, and fraud. And he allowed for the fact that there was, human error. But in his day, manipulating data, suppression of inconvenient facts, he called that trimming and cooking. Gift authorship. I think, we're beginning to see, I think this is beginning to me to look like fraud. And I think we need to see it as research misconduct, and people need to take the consequences along those lines. On that note, I just want to talk about retraction. When should a journal retract an article? And this just shows you that as the number of publications in total are going up, retractions are going up, and as a proportion of total publications, retractions are going up. So it's not just because the literature is growing that retractions are going up, it's actually as a proportion. People are talking about a retraction epidemic in the literature. And you may have seen this article by Fang et al. In the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences last year. They looked at all 2,000 articles indexed by PubMed that had been retracted as of May the 3rd, 2012. And interestingly, they found that only a fifth of those were attributable to error, and over 2/3 of them were attributable to misconduct, including fraud or suspected fraud. So that, I think, was a surprise to everyone, that we didn't think that fraud was such a big cause of retraction. And it says the percentage of scientific articles retracted because of fraud has increased about tenfold since 1975. Now, does that mean that there's more fraud, or that journals are much more willing to retract as a result of fraud, or journals are more willing to label it as research misconduct when they retract? Interesting for me, because I've been involved in the Andrew Wakefield MMR scare thing, which we're currently being sued for by Andrew Wakefield for the work we published. His article, published in The Lancet in 1998, is the most cited retracted article ever. And because of the stuff we put in the BMJ, it's labelled as fraud. So I think that's a very interesting sequence of events, and a good, in its own way, a good result. I just want to mention this briefly, and I'm sorry, Peter, if I don't know how ready we are to talk about this, but it seems to me to be a really interesting next step. while we're waiting for the EMA to do its work, while we're waiting for the FDA to catch up, while we're waiting for the industry to be put under pressure and come to some view on all of this, some of these data are out there. And as an example, the famous GSK study into Paxil, paroxetine? Which what is it? What's the brand name? Paxil. It is, but it's something different in the UK. In adolescents, which seemed to say that the drug was effective and not too harmful. And in fact, it turns out that cases of self-harm were suppressed from the paper that was published. And the paper was ghostwritten, and it's full of a whole host of stuff. The journal has refused to retract the paper again. Just recently, the calls have gone out, and the journal continues to refuse to retract it. And the institution who hosted the paper also refused to censor it in any way. But the data are now available through various legal channels and lawsuits. And so this idea is to invite other people to analyze the data, reanalyze them, and come to different conclusions, potentially, to the conclusions that are in the public domain. So this is really a kind of Cochrane-like enterprise where people will be encouraged to find unpublished data or mispublished data, reanalyze them, and publish what might be the correct result. And the BMJ is very keen to support that, as is PLOS Medicine and Archives of Internal Medicine. So that's coming soon to a website near you. I'm just going to finish now. I haven't got a lot of further solutions, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's clear that we've got a major problem. It's clear that it's pharmaceutical, a major player, academic also involved. We need to consider a wide range of behaviours that threaten the integrity of science: concealment of data, non-publication, manipulation of data, bullying of junior researchers. We still see that. Guest and ghost authorship. Recent surveys show this is still very prevalent. Undeclared conflicts of interest. And I think we must make this a matter of urgent public interest. And this is one of my predecessors, Hugh Clegg, who said a subject that needs reform should be kept before the public until it demands reform. And I think if we can make this real for the public, then the drug industry and regulators and others will find themselves unable to continue with current practices. Thank you very much. So, what are we going to do? Kurt.
Couple of comments. Part of the problem, it seems to me, is with the statement that all the data, now, working in the trenches, all the data is it's rarely ever possible to provide all the data. So it seems to me we need to be more rational with regard to what we mean by, quote, all data. The second, at least here, and I don't know about in the UK, we live with HIPAA, and in order to provide the data, it has to be de-identified and sanitized and so on. So that's a problem in the trenches. And third, part of the problem, it seems to me, at least working in NIH-funded trials, they have policy that says you have to deposit data and so on, but they don't pay for it. So when you get to the end, you're supposed to prepare data sets that are made available, but the funding agency doesn't pay for them. So I think the funding agency has to be put on the line with regard to being more responsible about these things, because when you come to the end, and you're funded by government funding or whatever, what's the next thing you do? You're looking for other funding. You're not necessarily looking for trying to finish the data set and so on. So there are mismatches here that need to be fixed.
I agree. I agree with all those things. I could respond, but it'd be better to hear from you guys. Thoughts on that or other things? Yeah.
That data set that you mentioned, that Axel, that you say that's publicly available, that they're putting out to investigators to analyze, where is that?
Peter could perhaps give us more on that.
So the 2004 settlement between the Legislator's Office, New York State Attorney General's Office, and GSK. One of the terms of the consent order that denying studies in pediatric patients had to be made public on the GSK website. Actually, I discovered, 8 years later, that they hadn't made those full study reports public. They made about...
Which study reports, not individual patient data?
The study reports, and the study reports, in their entirety, the appendices do contain individual patient data. But these are anonymized data already at the level of the study report. So you're not having the addresses.
I understand that, but they actually have outcomes for individual patients.
Yes. But what was missing were those individual patient outcomes. All the appendices were missing. So I got in touch with GSK, which said, sorry, you can use what's there and have a nice day. And so I got in touch then with the Attorney General's office and said, this consistent with the consent order. They got in touch with GSK, and 6 months later, now we have 40,000 additional pages, including all those appendices that are actually website.
So you go to GSK website?
Yeah, anybody can.
And so have people reanalyzed it? And
We're just about to
hardly anybody knows that it's there. So, yeah. But that's one of the...
That's the one plan, we have to alert people to that.
Well, I'd just like to comment on what Kurt Meinert said, that no funding to put the data. I spent 3 years after I retired with help from my former colleagues who had moved on to other jobs, putting data from 3 major clinical trials that have been very long into the Johns Hopkins Medical Archives, doing the documentation, working with the archivist, so it was able to be accessed publicly and so on. It's a huge task. And if I'd been working on anything else other than packing up my office, I wouldn't have had the time or the ability to spend on that. And if my former colleagues who were helping me hadn't been willing to devote some of their time to it, it just wouldn't have been possible. And the funding was long gone, so...
so what happened? You get this data, what people access it?
I'm sorry, have people access it?
Yeah.
Yes. It's not a hot topic like these pharma topics.
Yeah.
None of the 3 studies that were hot topics, but we have had requests for the data, and people are working through the approval process.
Do you think that if researchers knew that was what they were going to have to do at the outset, that we would all just get much smarter about how we collect the data in the first place? And I mean, is that part of it? It's a huge chore to clean up data in retrospect. And I think one of the reasons
that
why
wasn't the job.
No.
The job data were cleaned concurrently with running the study. It wasn't a cleanup issue.
No, I don't mean clean up in a kind of manipulation way, but just simply in the fact that the data could be loaded in a, I don't know, is that more...
It doesn't help to know it's money, it's funding.
Yeah.
It's a funding agency. You've got to have money to do
Well, then
that.
I think that's a very important next step, isn't it? And I mentioned the HTA in the UK. The fact they make it, they don't release the whole grant until the researchers have done what they need. But I mean, they might need to just release more. There might need to be a bigger grant. Take into account.
And even though we worked on archiving as the trial went on, you can't finish everything until the trial's over. And things change. I mean, platforms change. What sort of media should the data be in when it goes to the archives? When a trial started 25 years ago, and now you're trying to archive it, things have changed over time.
And I think it may be that Roche, for example, that's what they're struggling with, is they can't find the data. I think
Yeah, I mean, there's a tiny bit of precedent, so like PCORE, which is the new research institute that aims to do, to research different, to take a line from Apple. Your grant is for more than a certain amount of money. They require you to create a public use data set. But if that will cost something, they ask you to estimate how much it will cost.
What are they called?
I'm sorry?
What's it called? PCORE,
PCORE, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute.
Oh, yeah.
But they may not give it to you.
Right.
They may not give it, in general, they may not give anything.
So the estimate is fine, right? But we're not funding it.
Peter.
Just to respond to this point about making your data available, there seems to be a huge gulf between industry and academia here, where if industry actually wants to make the data available, it can happen very quickly. And I suppose part of what drives that is that when industry runs these drug trials, particularly the pre-marketing drug trials, these are trials where they know they're going to be audited by somebody, or by regulators. And so you have in your head already this idea that the data has to be in a format such that somebody else can read it. So maybe that's part of what's driving this, is that many in academia don't come with this attitude that the data will be shared as a matter of ordinary sort of business. And if that changes, then we do have this idea of auditing and other parties constantly double-checking and triple-checking our work, trying to verify maybe data will be collected and be made available or be funded so that it can be available.
I would be really suspicious if anybody 30 years ago was suspecting that their database would be on the internet now, because we weren't even talking about the internet 30 years ago. And that's the position I was in.
Thanks for presenting and for taking the lead on this. I and a number of people in this room do outcomes research, effectiveness research, usually with secondary data. And our study designs, made the randomized trials and clinical trials look very simple and easy and standard. And so as we move more towards secondary use of electronic medical records in the States, as you might know, we use a lot of claims, insurance claims, which cover about 70% of the people. Everything cubed or squared in terms of complexity. And Corey that Albert was talking about is part of health reform and is trying to make use of this government paid for Medicare, Medicaid, and now Obamacare. And so I think that we haven't quite grappled with that. And I'm unaware. So when I do a study, it's millions of records with 10 different organizations, the HIPAA and the EMR, the so-called learning organization. Kaiser Permanente played in the Vioxx, through their so-called EPIC EMR. They were one of the factors, I think, that blew this open. So I think that's something that
very important.
We haven't grappled with that
Absolutely.
whole dimension.
Talking about the de-identification that HIPAA requires, I don't know, is that a huge, is that remain a huge challenge? I mean, when we've talked about the data, it's usually already de-identified, but...
The quick answer is yes. A huge challenge, I don't know, but certainly a challenge, and we've just seen the beginning of it, because right now EMRs are only about 5% of this country, but just today we've reached about 70% of all doctors have it on their desks, but they haven't quite made it into the research yet. And in the UK, as you know, it's on every doctor's desk, but it's not really very accessible.
Yes.
The GP EMR. So I think that's a whole future challenge.
Yes. And the other thing is the consent form. I mean, that's where I think we're going to, another little push we're going to work on, is this idea, and quoted in that editorial that Ian Chalmers wrote with me, is a paper that they've written, I can't remember whether they published it, anyway, it's referenced, where it's in trials, probably, where they've looked at what the new consent form might say, where patients would actually say, I entered this trial on the understanding that my data will be made available and anonymised for use by third parties. And the idea that we could convince the public that that's, otherwise why would they go into a trial? So I think, again, it comes back to expectation. We can plant that expectation right from the start. We're in a very different world. Yeah.
Just curious what sort of interactions you've had with sort of consumer organizations. One of the most fundamental problems is that your bottom line message is going to be extremely unpopular. It's not what people want to hear, right? We know incredibly little about most of what happens in this. And now to say not only we don't know a whole lot about what we're doing, but we also question the validity of half of what's out there. And I think I'm actually pretty skeptical about how far we're ever going to get, just whether we're speaking from an editor's office or from an academic office, until we really find a way to connect with consumer organizations that fully understand the depth of these problems that go way beyond anything that we're going to be able to address sitting in our academic sites and sitting in journal offices.
Yes. I think that's a really great point. We're working with two groups actually now, but I don't underestimate the challenge at all. In the UK, there's a group called Centre About Science, which is running this alltrials.net campaign. And they have, they're UK-based, but they have a wider remit. And they've helped us with changing our libel laws in the UK to try, because libel law is something that most people don't think is very interesting, but they have managed to make it interesting. They've got it through into Parliament. With this alltrials.net, their take on it is really interesting. Keep the message simple. That point you make about people don't want to know that their doctors are treating them with drugs that we don't know the basis of. They're helping to manage that message into one, justified outrage is the emotion we want to elicit, rather than a kind of nihilistic horror. Or it could go both ways. I can see that. The other group in the US is Consumer Reports, who have a very good track record on this, and we're working with them on a conference in September on overdiagnosis and looking at, sentinel node biopsy is just one of those cases where overtreatment is maybe based in lack of evidence base or the wrong evidence base. And Consumer Reports, I think, will be a very good ally in trying to get the message, because they have a very wide reach in the States. So you're quite right. We've got to get the message right. I would look out for Ben Goldacre's book, Bad Pharma. I'm really interested to know how it goes in the US. It's not out yet, is it? I don't think so.
My copy's British.
You've got the British copy. I think it's out in the next few weeks in the US, and I'll be fascinated to know how well it goes. It may be completely panned. It's a good read, and it's quite frightening, and I think a lot of what he says is true. So see how that goes.
Do you have the equivalent of HIPAA in the UK?
About patients, about the ethics of research, patients and data, that thing. We have the Data Protection Act and things like that. Yeah, we do have. It seems to
sort of like the US, or
I'm afraid I don't know enough detail, but we do have various laws around it.
what's it called?
The Data Protection Act.
We do have standards actually within the NHS in terms of how data is anonymised, what we call pseudonymisation. I have my own views on that. That would self-safe it really.
Yes, I forgot, Richard, you're here. What do we have? The DPA, yeah?
It's tough. It's very tough. We'll have our own recorded guarding into the audience. I'm constantly being nagged by my medical director to make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in terms of information governance and penalties for failing.
I don't know how long to go on. There's a lady.
I was just going to say, one of the issues that I find now is that we clearly all believe we should be transparent and all the data should be out there, but then along with that comes the idea of educating people how to interpret the data. Because I think we have gone from the side of not telling people things, and now there's some very interesting data, whether it be from consents or from just the data that's out there, to how much do people want to know, and how is that helping in interpreting them. So there's a bit of data that I've read that, for example, in consenting people about the risks and benefits, you can tell them too little, but you can also tell them too much, that it actually ends up that they won't do anything, they're quite paralyzed. And so as you start to put out this data, in the context that most people, even people highly educated, find it hard to interpret the data, we have to be careful, that we're not making people not do things, and sort of stop, the good things in this, and the good medications people stop taking because they already become suspicious of the bad things.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be
That's a very tough one. The whole shared decision aids. I agree. It's a whole another piece of work, and a lot of good work happening, but we're by no means.
You sort of don't want to unravel the good things while we're trying to work out.
Yeah.
Which I think could easily.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to you for timing wise. So you say how many more questions. You okay to take some more?
Some more. Many of the trials that you're talking about that are not published, are many of them submitted to the regulatory authorities for the approval of drugs? So does the FDA have those data?
Peter will know more, but yes, the answer is yes, which is what that study by one of the studies, I can't remember which one it is, they looked at. Yes, they looked at the FDA, if you added in the unpublished data that FDA held, how much influence that had on the effect size.
So the EMA is going to,
Yeah, it's going to put it all out there, yeah. That's what they say.
The new drugs, right?
With the new drugs.
And the FDA, what kind of pressure can we put on the FDA?
Well, the FDA is interesting because I think they have a better reputation for transparency than the EMA, but they're not actually living up to it. And with when you put freedom of information request to the FDA, the Tamiflu saga, they haven't had a reply yet. The EMA.
So wouldn't that be the silver beacon?
Yeah. If you get the FDA to do the same as the EMA, I think that would be a big step. And so maybe that's what we need to make in the US. That's the target, would be to get the FDA to do that.
So the Sunshine Act only applies to what's presented in advisory board meetings,
right,
not to what's sent to them as part of.
So I guess it's all this patent. The drug companies don't want to make their commercialization. Those things capitalists.
Yeah, exactly right. Albert, you had a question.
I'm wondering, apropos Kurt's comment, sort of what do you mean, all the data? Another step might be to be much more specific or to prescribe some requirements to get some consensus on what all the data means. Because I don't think we indeed necessarily would benefit from all the data, but there's certain things that one might reverse.
I'm going to give the last word to Peter because sorry.
I have to share an anecdote that I think illustrates what we're up against here. I was late, right before I came over here, I got a call from one of my patients who's a faculty member here, who's desperately ill with what sounds like almost certainly influenza, and was desperately seeking a prescription for Tamiflu. And I realized in the moment that the power of that company's marketing exceeds everything that I knew about Peter's work. And that's what we face at the individual level as much as we face on the policy level.
So what did you say to him?
I am embarrassed to say I provided.
Probably fine.
And if I'm doing that, and I should know better.
Well, the answer is we don't know. So I think you could say either way at the moment. But I mean,
that's a huge
very
challenge.
interesting.
Did he get his flu shot directly?
Yes.
Peter was just going to then
Well, I actually had a question to have to do with collective intelligence, which is we focus a lot on problems in sharing data because there could be re-identification and misuse. And I just wonder, and it seems like the blame always goes on the data provider because somebody misused your data. So that's HIPAA, the blame goes to the people who collect data. Are there no laws that say that misusing data, re-identifying patients is illegal and you will be punished for it? Does the U.S. have such a law? Does the UK have such a law? All the focus seems to be only on one side of the equation, and the person who actually commits, the egregious violation here is sort of, hey, I did it. I cracked the code and reverse engineered to figure out who needs to get
Yes.
Well, no, if you provide data and the patient gets identified, you bet your sweet baby there are laws for the institution for you.
So I'm trying to say, what about the person who misused the data and re-identified who are they not punished?
Well, in theory, they agree to, if they receive it, to not re-identify it, but there's no guarantee.
But I think Peter's made a good point. If one could, that would be progress, wouldn't it? Because it would free up a lot of the current constraints that are around people. The provider feeling GSK for the moment is saying they can't release these data on Relenza because of fears about patient identity and also patient consent. They're the two things they're using. So it's a good point, Peter. I mean, that's
like arresting the John.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much.